Yeah, thanks, Shaun. That's really cool. And I guess I'd like to move on now to a couple of specific things. And we chatted about earlier when you were suggesting some ideas. And I'm really pumped to hear some of this. So let's dig a bit deeper. Some key government stimulus measures for business. What are you seeing, and what are some of the discussions you're having right now?
Yeah, look, a lot of varying discussions with businesses depending on how far they've been affected at this point in time, and trying to predict with a lot of uncertainty where things are going to go in the coming months as we continue to navigate through this challenging situation with the coronavirus outbreak and pandemic. So in terms of some stimulus measures that have been around to help business for the last few weeks, and that have been tweaked a number of times, but probably one of the major ones is the tax-free cash flow boost, which is effectively a grant from the government. It's a tax-free amount, so it's not going to cause any tax issues for your business. But for employers, there's up to $100,000 on offer that's spread across a number of months, and comes in the form of a credit against your BAS account for your business. But as I said, up to 100,000. So there's some significant benefit to be gained there from a cash flow point of view. Moving on from that one, some of the other key measures are the apprentice and trainee rebate, where the government will pay a subsidy for apprentice and trainee wages for a 9-month period, backdated to 1st of January this year, and will continue all the way until the end of September. So if you've got any apprentices or trainees, that can be a great help with funding or partially funding the cost of keeping them employed for the next 5 or 6 months, and getting some a little bit of a kickback on what you've already paid them. If your business is in a situation where it does need to invest in any equipment or infrastructure, there's been an increase to the instant asset write-off, which has been $30,000 for the last 12 months or so. That's actually been pushed up to 150 grand. And whilst that one, probably won't have a huge take up, if your business is in a position where it was ready to pull the trigger on some capital investment of some sort, then potentially there's some additional tax incentives there
So that's like
that you can take advantage of.
It's like a full write-off in one crack rather than having to
Correct.
depreciate over time.
Exactly right. So that gives you the benefit of getting your tax savings on that investment now.
Okay.
That one runs until the 30th of June 2020, so it's only a short time frame.
Yeah,
but again, if there was something you're ready to pull the trigger on and you've got the cash flow to do it, then there's something worth looking at and considering there.
Yeah, and the tax office stuff?
From the ATO, they're definitely in consultation mode, so that they're happy to have the conversations with you around your business. Whilst there isn't anything specific in relation to the COVID-19 situation just at the minute, they are very open to communications and discussions, and I've already had situations where clients that have been affected by a business lockdown, where they've had the conversations with the tax office, and the tax office have effectively said, look, we're happy to put all of your tax liabilities on pause until September or October, and we'll revisit again at that point to see where things are up to then. So they are being very considerate of the current circumstances.
And of all of those things, what would be the biggest ones you've had multiple conversations? Is it people seeking Centrelink support, or the JobKeeper, jobseeker information, or is it somewhere around these? What would be the biggest conversations?
Look, I think that the 100K cash flow boost, and then the JobKeeper stimulus in terms of our business clientele, they've probably been the most most questions have been generated around those two particular ones. We'll probably touch on the JobKeeper a little bit more later on.
Yeah, great. And that was so one of the next ones. We'll hold that one briefly, but the next one we talked about earlier was managing your business in this sort of tough economy. Really interested in your thoughts on what's your key advice to businesses right now about getting through this sort of situation.
Sure. Look, I think it's a situation of where managing things more closely is going to be the key to keeping your business viable in this tough difficult period that we're experiencing. And as always, cash flow is always king, that old adage, but it's so true in this environment in particular, especially around chasing your debtors or your invoicing to make sure that your customers are paying where they can, and getting commitments from them, as well as being flexible at the same time. So if they're struggling to pay your bills, one thing that I find is always very helpful and is received quite well is saying, look, I'm happy for you to pay that invoice over a 2 or 3 month period, but getting that commitment from your customer to say, yeah, I will pay a certain amount each month to clear that up, and just basically enforcing it as well to make sure that they're sticking to what the plan was. It's also about being robust in today's environment, reacting to the changes that are happening on a daily basis. I think we've seen it a lot with the cafes and restaurants where they've moved into the takeaway and home delivery markets, for example, looking for alternate ways for your business to generate revenue to compensate for areas that you've lost.
Yeah, we had Evan was my guest last month from now Bellsline Eats, and a lot of the cafes and restaurants really hooking into that. Great to see them finding new markets, if you like.
Yep, definitely. That new income stream or a new way of keeping your existing income stream going, it's definitely something that's got to be considered. Probably the other things is talking to your trusted advisors, along with your bank and your landlord, I guess, are the key. So your accountant, your mortgage broker, your solicitor, particularly just at the moment, I think your accountant, in terms of the government measures that are available to your business, making sure you're across them and that you're planning to ensure that you're maximising your benefits under these stimulus measures that the government has out there. Talking to your mortgage broker and your bank, looking at your cash flow scenario and predicting that, forecasting it over the next 6 months, say, and ascertaining whether you need to get some payment pause relief or something along those lines. And then the third one, your landlord for your rent. Scott Morrison was discussing yesterday afternoon some of the relief measures that the federal government is suggesting there. So definitely need to be in communication with them, particularly those businesses that are really struggling at the moment.
That's great, mate. And I might actually, I think that's really good for people to engage in that process, to be mindful of new markets, to be on top of their financials, to get their BASs going so they can claim any eligible benefits and stuff. One of the things, and I'm conscious of your time, I know you're running real crazy right now. We chatted before about the JobKeeper subsidy. So I wonder, could you give us a little bit more on that and how you see it rolling through in the legislative side and what that means to people?
Look, just briefly on the subsidy itself, it's essentially $1,500 per employee per fortnight to a business where you can justify your revenue has decreased by 30% or more. So yeah, as I said, per employee. So potentially, many multiples of that $1,500 per fortnight that comes back as a subsidy to the employer to assist the employer in keeping their staff employed and to be able to pay them at least that $1,500 per fortnight in wages to help their personal situation for their staff as well. Now, in a lot of cases, that can include the business owner themselves, if they're an employee of their own company or if they're operating as a sole trader. Then the announcement information that's out there at the moment suggesting that the sole trader or a partnership, the business owners themselves would also be entitled to that $1,500 per fortnight. The final details around what would be eligible in terms of the 30% reduction in revenue, Parliament's sitting as we speak to finalise the details around that. So there has been a little bit of confusion around that about what would be eligible, what wouldn't be, what periods you need to assess it over. So I don't want to get too granular on the details for that aspect of it. But a couple of examples of where this can be a really fantastic measure is if your business is in complete lockdown phase, something like a beauty salon where they've just been forced to close their doors. This measure enables that business to obtain the wage subsidy and actually pay their staff for the next 6 months whilst their business is in complete lockdown. So they can keep those employees financially viable, but also keep them attached to their business, so that when the needle starts to move on the economy again and these restrictions start to be lifted, you've got your employee base there in place, ready to recommence again. You're not starting again. You're not having to find staff to operate your business.
And I assume
the other one,
the important benefit to holding staff is it's a slightly higher payment, isn't it? And also, JobSeeker requires people still to look for 4 jobs a month or make inquiry and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so.
That's right. Yeah, it is. It is a little bit of whilst it's taxed to the employee, it works out about $100 a week more in the hands of the employee in comparison to the job seeker allowance. So a little bit more money, keep them attached to that employment role as well. I guess the other example of where it can be really beneficial was I have a client who's a cafe, and whilst they're affected by being limited to takeaway business only, they've had to pull back their operations and pull back their staff numbers. However, in this particular case, the business owner's been able to keep 3 of her more senior staff employed and operating the cafe as just basically takeaway coffees only. And then she's been able to also obtain the $1,500 per fortnight. This is assuming the legislation goes ahead, which it will. But she can stay home, do the homeschool thing with her kids, and allow 3 of her senior staff to be, retain employment and operate her business and keep some form of contact with the clientele as well. So there's a whole range of different areas and different ways that measure might be beneficial to business as a whole. Probably one point that I just do want to make there is the ATO over the last 2 or 3 years has introduced a system called single touch payroll, or STP. And the initial announcements are suggesting that your business needs to be registered for STP in order to be eligible for this JobKeeper subsidy. Whilst probably 85 to 90% of businesses are registered for STP already, there are some of the micro businesses that are still exempt from that for the current financial year, but they may need to jump into that almost immediately in order to be eligible for JobKeeper.
Yeah, I just want to confirm I am registered, mate. So
excellent, well done. Good to hear.
It's all good.
Great.
Hey,
great.
That's a fabulous update and information source for all. Thanks so much. So if someone was to look to contact you or seek information or advice, or you might have a client not happy with their accountant, how do they touch base with you, mate?
Look, the best way to get in touch with me is just to call our office, which is 024578 3044, and then we can have an initial conversation or a Zoom meeting, as it might be, to have a discussion about what you're looking for and what you need. And always happy to have that initial chat with anyone out there who needs a bit of guidance.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, and really appreciate your advice and input today. Shaun from Lamb Lowe and Partners, big thank you.
Thanks, Martin.